Guys, Lauma is the first new 5-star that will drop with the official release of Nodcry, and she's shaking up to be a very important release in terms of meta. In this video we'll talk about her kit, about what to prioritize when leveling her up, about her best builds, best teams, and constellations, but I will also talk about her pull value and whether or not I believe she's a must pull. So, Lauma is a Dendro Catalyst character, and her archetype is that of a sub-DPS/support. This already makes her kinda similar to Nahida, and in a lot of ways, in my opinion, Lauma is the Nahida of 2025 for Dendro. Just like her, she also skills off Elemental Mastery, in some ways even more, and in this regard she's statistically gifted. By this I mean that other than the normal Elemental Mastery Ascension stats she gets, she also has a base 200 Elemental Mastery, completely for free. Something even the Dendro Archon herself can brag about.
Do you want to get Lauma, but you don't have enough gems to do so?
I think I might have the right solution for you. This video has been sponsored by LD Shop, a website that allows you to buy Genesis crystals for much cheaper than it will cost in-game, so you can hopefully get all the characters you want. Through LD Shop, you'll be able to get discounts that start from 15% off and can get considerably bigger depending on the specific deal. This is, of course, all done legally, and there is no risk of ban in-game really, something I can testify for myself because I bought from LD Shop before and also other similar means and never had any issues. The website offers a special coupon upon registration to get an additional discount and even a VIP system that gives you a Welkin Moon if you spend over $80. The whole process is also pretty easy and straightforward. You just have to fill out the forms that require your UID and server region, pay through the site, and you will receive the Genesis crystal in-game shortly after. This way, you will be able to get the amazing characters you want, but at a lower price than you would otherwise pay. You'll be able to reach LD Shop and get discounts by clicking on the link in the description below.
Her kit, in actuality, is pretty simple. Her only significant attacks come from the Elemental skill, which when used will deal some damage, initiate a continuous attack that will apply Dendro every 2 seconds for 15 seconds in total, and reduce resistance to Hydra and Dendro on all the opponents it hits, up to 25% each. This already sets up her supportive kit pretty nicely, because she has one of the best Dendro applications in the game, and the fact she reduces resistance to Dendro as well as Hydro is quite unique. Hydro characters have always been a central piece of Dendro teams, so the fact she does that is pretty nice. The initial hit of the Elemental skill has a special mechanic. In fact, on use, it will absorb things from the field called Dewdrops, up to 3, and deal more damage the more it absorbs. These Dewdrops can be created by any member of the team upon generating a bloom, with a cooldown of 2.5 seconds each, so 7.5 seconds to maximize on the Elemental skill effect. To be more specific, Lauma's presence on the team is what allows for this, as she makes the team's blooms lunar blooms instead. These lunar blooms will create the Dewdrops, but other than that they won't have any difference, even in terms of damage. Meanwhile, her skill's first hit will deal direct lunar damage, which functions in a way that's similar to Ineffa's direct lunar attacks, for example. Overall, Lauma's skill deals quite the damage, and it has a pretty short cooldown of 12 seconds, meaning she can use it quite frequently. If you can play around her cooldowns perfectly, Lauma will be a very good sub-DPS for you. The Dewdrops she absorbs won't just impact the skill however, but also the Elemental Burst. This burst, when used, will increase bloom damage for the whole team by a flat amount, which skills off her Elemental Mastery, but only for a limited amount of damage instances. The more Dewdrops consumed through her Elemental skill, the more instances the burst will buff. This is more important for Hyperbloom and Burgeon teams than Hyperbloom, because on these compositions the blooms will deal a lot of AoE damage, meaning a lot more damage instances compared to the single target damage Hyperbloom deals, for example. Lauma also buffs bloom damage through her passive. In fact, when she's the only Nodcry character on the team, she will give a fixed crit rate and crit damage to all the bloom attacks generated by the team, just like Nahida does with her Constellation too. Meanwhile, if there is a second Nodcry character on the team, this passive will buff Lunar Bloom's crit rate and crit damage instead. And as a reminder, the only Lunar Bloom damage Lauma teams will deal will be her Elemental skills. They're doing this most likely because when Nefer will eventually come out, she'll team up with Lauma in a Lunar lunar bloom core, and normal bloom will be less relevant. And this is interesting because from this fact alone, you can see that Lauma is not a character that is designed to need a second non-cry character on the team like Flame says, for example, but rather she has different playstyles depending on her team composition, and that's just a much better outlook for her. In fact, when she's the only non-cry character, she'll be buffing bloom damage for the team by a lot, enough to revitalize an archetype that became much weaker over time due to power creep. And this, in my opinion, really makes her valuable by default, because she's the only one doing this for the element. While you might argue that if you have teams like Skirks, Varesas, Mavuikas, you don't need to care about Dendro, I would argue that even in that case you might actually, because Genshin is becoming more and more matchup dependent, with specific stages favoring specific teams. And so having a character like Lauma in your account, so a character that single-handedly enables a whole archetype now, could really come in handy. As for her leveling priority, you want to level her up to level 80, then focus on talents. Burst and Skill have similar talent level priority, as they impact the team damage in a similar way. It can fluctuate in some teams depending on Lauma's specific role, but generally you should level them up simultaneously. Then level her up to 90 if you want, but it's not a huge deal. Now let's talk about teams, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. Teams-wise, there is a lot to talk about here. Lauma is a support for Bloom, so of course on teams like Nilbloom, Hyperbloom Burgeon, she makes all of those compositions better, but even for teams like Quicken, if you play Quick Bloom, so you merge Hyperbloom and Quicken, Lauma can make those better as well. However, her contribution is bigger on teams that have the biggest Bloom damage amount, in the sense that the more important Bloom damage is for the team, the larger will be her impact. For this reason, teams like Nilbloom, which almost entirely depend on that reaction for their total output, benefit the most, while Quick Bloom teams, who are more varied in damage sources, benefit less. Starting from Nilu compositions, those teams are a bit hard to calculate because they're rather quick swappy teams that don't have a fixed rotation because you can just swap characters around freely depending on the situation, and so it's hard to estimate a specific rotation for these teams. Even then though, some of them have some strict aspects you want to keep in mind. For example, on Kokomi Bloom, since Kokomi is a character that can go on field for lengths of time and apply a lot of Hydro through her normal and charge attacks, she can even overtake the Dendro Aura during that sequence if the setup is not proper. This will result in fewer blooms for the team. What helps is, for example, using something like Nahida's skill and a normal attack right before her field time to set a strong Dendro Aura. Nahida's low cooldowns are really helpful for this scenario, as they allow you to do this even if you used it previously in the rotation. If you do things right and maximize the Dendro Aura on opponents, the team's single target damage will be significant, but not absurdly so. It makes sense because Bloom is a team that performs massively better in AoE, and so having a single target baseline that is already, on average, around the level of many Nathan DPS teams is already pretty great. Note that I put Sacrificial Fragments on Kokomi here because her skill has a pretty lengthy 20 seconds long cooldown and applies Hydro in the same spot for 20 seconds. If the opponent's move, you will be wasting a lot of Hydro application, and so Sacrificial Fragments is typically the most consistent choice for Kokomi. Kokomi is replaceable by Barbara here, but she's much clunkier and on average worse than Kokomi. An easier team to use is definitely the variant with Xingqiu as the main Hydro applier. This is because Xingqiu is a sub DPS, and so he allows you to use a Dendron fielder, which makes maintaining the Dendro Aura for maximum blooms quite trivial. However, the flip side is that Xingqiu can keep you alive like Kokomi can because he's not a healer, and so you'll have to bring a Dendro healer on the team. Moving on to other setups, a team that will work much better in single target than Bloom is Hyperbloom. Pure Hyperbloom is a team that Lauma buffs drastically, because on top of her buffs to the reaction, Lauma also reduces resistance to Hydro, making double Hydro setups stronger than before here. Somebody like Cookie works perfectly since she can also heal, but if you want to take the risk, you can go Sustainless with Raiden instead, who has longer elemental skill uptime, and so she's a bit stronger as she causes lesser downtime. Hyperbloom's counterpart, Burgeon, is also getting significantly buffed with Lauma. However, compared to Hyperbloom, it's a weaker composition, options, because the recoil damage Burgeon causes forces you to run a healer if you want to stay alive, for example Kokomi or Barbara. About Quick Bloom, Lauma is an improvement across the board. For carries like Alhaitham and Cyno, who mainly depend on that, this is good news, because they become somewhat usable again. For someone like Clorand, it's not a huge deal, because she had a better team elsewhere. Honestly, the Lauma in FA Duo is just a very strong core, and it will work well in a number of teams, even those of stronger carries like for example Nubilet. And obviously there is much more, because Dendro really is an archetype that includes a lot of characters, but these calculations are just to show that Lauma buffs an entire element significantly, and so she will be a top tier choice in any type of content that favors Dendro. Talking about builds now, in terms of stats, Lauma is a character that wants Elemental Mastery, Energy Recharge, and Crit. Her goblet should be Elemental Mastery in every scenario. For the Sands, you can go either Energy Recharge or Elemental Mastery depending on your weapon option and the rest of your stats, and for the Circlet, you can go either Crit or Elemental Mastery. It's not a big difference either way. In terms of energy requirements specifically, they're honestly not that high for a sub DPS, mostly because on many teams she's paired with a second Dendro character, or she's used as an on-field Dendro applier, and so she never ends up having a huge energy requirement. Artifacts wise, it honestly depends, because Lauma kinda wants to use whatever the team wants her to use. If the team has no holder of the Deep Food set, then go Deep Food on her. Otherwise, if she's the only Nodcry character on the team, she can either use Gilded Dreams or one of the two Nodcry sets, either the DPS one or the support one. If there is a second Nodcry character, but there is another character holding Deep Food already, then she should use either of the Nodcry sets. Honestly, it's even more case-by-case scenario than what I'm saying here, but as a general rule, it should be fine. If you want, you can go see on the infographics I've shown before for the teams what artifacts I used there, just as a more specific example. Weapons-wise, her best free-to-play option is the Event Catalyst that gives Elemental Mastery and Energy Recharge, so it's perfect, because it almost completely takes care of her energy issues while still supplying her with a meaningful offensive stat. Her signature is a larger Elemental Mastery stat stake that also gives a reaction bonus for bloom damage to the whole team. It's a noticeable team damage increase over free-to-play option, but it gives no energy recharge, so you should use an energy recharge sense with it, maybe. Lastly, about her Constellations, her C1 is pretty interesting because it makes her heal. She doesn't heal a Constellation 0, but the Constellation 1 makes her heal to a similar amount as Shilonen in single target, so it's pretty meaningful. I've seen some people say it's useless because healing is not damage, but in a lot of ways it can be. On teams like Nilubloom, it allows you to use Kokomi with full Elemental Mastery artifacts instead of some HP artifacts to increase her healing, or Nahida instead of Baiju, both of those things being noticeable benefits. On Hyperbloom teams, it allows you to comfortably use Raiden instead of a defensive option like Cookie, and on Burgeon teams, it allows you to replace the Hydro healer for a Hydro sub DPS for much better results. On Fiorina teams, it means more fanfare stacks, which means more team damage. So, healing translates to a lot of damage benefits for her teams, and saying it's useless, it's like saying that Bennett's healing is useless for his kit, which is absurd. Her C2 basically doubles the buff her burst applies to bloom damage for the team, and if you have a second Nodcry character, it increases Lunar Bloom reaction bonus significantly as well. Both of these things are good buffs, for her as well as for the team. To end this video, Lauma is basically for Dendro what Escoffier was for Freeze, but the difference is that Dendro is just a much larger archetype. So, in my opinion, there is no situation where pulling Lauma will be inconsequential for your account. Now, is she a must pull? Honestly, obviously, it kind of depends on your own definition of must pull, but for my definition, she kind of is, because of how matchup dependent Genshin is becoming, especially in Stygian. And so having a character like Lauma on my account, a unique character, a unique Dendro character that will counter a lot of the content for the foreseeable future is very valuable, and I want to get her. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Also, go check LD shop through the links in the description below, and go check the Flint's guide I made yesterday. Bye bye.